You're listening to the Valley Current.
Right. I mean, I have to tell you, though, when I was a kid, I don't remember anyone talking about the Spanish flu. I have just zero recollection being a, young child or even teenager and someone saying, yeah, there was a pandemic about, 40 years ago. And it really, really devastated. I mean, devastation was actually slight compared to this, right? The relative devastation is actually slight.
Well, not really. There were millions of people killed by that flu epidemic. In Philadelphia, there were, hundreds of thousands of deaths.
Oh, so you don't think we're even up to the same metrics yet worldwide?
Well, I don't know about worldwide, but in this country, there is data on the number of deaths, but frankly, I don't remember the number now, but it's a fairly significant number.
Because, of course, these days on the web, you can just simply click a mouse and say, how do the numbers compare between 2018 and where we are today? And of course, there's a bunch of reports. I just quickly scan them. And it looks like a point that they're making is that the country, our country in 2018 was about a third the size. Like we were about 100 million people is what this is saying. This is
that's another serious consideration.
Right. The number of people. So the denominator, if you want to call, the comparison. So
I just saw something, you scroll down, 705,000.
Yeah.
Well, there are more than 705,000 people lost their lives.
In the U.S., but I think it's more like 900,000 now. This is a little dated.
Yeah, but wait a minute. If it's 100 million people in the country at that time, and today there's 3.5 times as many people.
Right.
Then that 705 is really close to 3 million.
Yeah, that's right. That's the comparison. But the numbers that are actually being expressed here are Spanish flu was 675 over the 100 million, right? So
so if there's 3.5 times as many people today, you have to multiply 675 by 3.3.
So you would say if we're using the Spanish flu as the metric, we've got a lot more deaths coming. Or you could say the truth is because of whatever the effect has been of the vaccines, the masking and the like, although there was masking at the time of the Spanish flu, we may actually, from a percentage point of view, end up with less deaths, more actual total numbers, but less from a percentage point of view, right?
Well, 700,000 by 3.3, let's say, you get 250 million.
2.2 million.
Let's say 2.2 million, okay.
Yeah.
And we haven't reached that yet.
No.
We're only at a little over 900,000.
Right. So we've got double. If you take the view.
So the Spanish flu is far more impactful.
Right. And
than the present COVID.
Right. Right. And the point I was making or trying to make is 40 years later, at least when I was a kid, 40, 50 years later, I don't remember anyone talking about it as a kid. And I don't remember learning about it, frankly, until relatively recently in connection with this pandemic. In other words, I don't remember even in any college classes, graduate school classes, high school classes. I just don't remember it being a topic yet. I think 50 years from now, our kids are.
Have you ever taught about the Black Plague?
Is that what they called it? They used a more generic name? Or you're talking about Black Plague like from centuries ago?
Did you ever learn in your history class or whatever that there was such a thing as the Black Plague in the medieval times?
In the medieval times, but not before World War I, there was a period of time that resulted in, according to this data, 50 million worldwide. I don't think the world, my guess is the world at that point was maybe half the number of people, 5 billion people. It certainly was much smaller. The population was much smaller, right? 100 years ago, right? So
well, I remember hearing about it for two reasons. First of all, since I'm a Philadelphian,
right,
and Philadelphia was so hard hit,
yes,
that my parents may have mentioned it, but briefly.
right.
But the main reason why I know about it is because I have a doctorate in medical microbiology, and so I should know about those
Right.
things, and I do.
Right. But do you remember telling your kids about it? Like, do you remember it sort of being a topic of conversation? Because I have to tell you, I don't remember it at all. I don't remember my parents talking about it at all. Zero. And my father was born after.
I can't say I have a specific memory of it, no.
Okay.
But they do have more of a knowledge of virology, only because I would talk about it with Ruth, and they would hear what I would be saying. Not that they would understand everything, but their knowledge of virology is probably a tiny bit better than most kids.
I mean, here's another fact that comes up, which is aspirin poisoning became a problem because doctors suggested mega doses of aspirin, which I guess 30 grams of aspirin is a mega dose, and that would prove fatal to a number of people. So like dealing with the symptoms by use of aspirin generated a lot of aspirin poisonings as a result.
Well, it's still a problem even with that knowledge today, because it is well known to damage the intestinal tract for people who take it constantly, as has been recommended by cardiologists.
Right.
But what is recommended is what's called a baby aspirin.
Right, right.
In fact, I take it twice a week.
Oh, just twice a week. Okay.
Well, I was taking it every day, but despite my cardiologist's recommendation, I have reduced it to twice a week.
Oh, your cardiologist suggests you do more, but you know that
it's like a baby aspirin daily.
Right.
But there was a recent huge study that indicated that it didn't have the effect that earlier studies said it had on reducing cardiovascular disease. So there's controversy about it.
Right. But as you get older, do you see yourself doing more of these sort of precautionary things than you did as a younger person?
Well, sure. I'm on metformin because, like most people my age, we suffer from something called metabolic disease. Metabolic disease is increased blood pressure, greater likelihood for diabetes, increased weight, I think. Mm-hmm. And that is experienced by almost everyone, mostly men, but I think it's also women, as you get older and older. So I'm not unusual in respect to that. But I do take meds that are designed to interfere with that process and reduce its impact on my health. And aspirin would be one thing, metformin would be another, and blood pressure medicine would be another. Mm-hmm. But I'm far from being rare in that respect. That's been the advice of virtually every physician to people my age and far younger. I don't know whether you've been prescribed with any of those meds or not.
No, I always get the recommendation that I should lose 50 pounds. And I've lost a lot of weight.
Are you taking any meds?
No, zero.
Well, there will soon come a time when your physician will start prescribing.
Get ready. I saw the bag of pills that my mom took, and I just found that horrendous because
she was over medicated.
Right. I have to tell you, my grandmother, both grandmothers, they just didn't believe in medication at all. And I don't think either of them, right up to their respective deaths in their 90s, really ever took medications. They just didn't think that was the thing to do. Of course, we have a much more modern approach these days. So,
well, they're like my father and one of my aunts with whom I was very close, who felt the same way.
Right.
My father fell a couple of times. It later turned out he had suffered from mini strokes and didn't realize it. But he would never go to a physician. He would never take meds. And so he died in his early 70s. He could have lived much longer had he gone to a physician. You couldn't convince him to do it.
Right.
So you're right. At that time, that was a common experience.
So the world, I have to tell you, from my perspective, the world seems to be ready to say the pandemic is over. In fact, they talk about it on the news that now it's more of an endemic, ENDEMIC. The end of the pandemic is called an endemic. And that...
Well, no, an endemic is simply a disease that affects far fewer people and usually localized, not worldwide.
So do you think that's more spin than reality? That is...
Well, first of all, I think it's dangerous because one of two things is going to happen. Either a new mutant will arise or the effects of the present Omicron mutant will continue to be a serious problem in many isolated communities or communities where vaccine rates are very low and where mask usage is very low. And that's going to continue to smolder in those communities for a very long time for all of the obvious reasons. Whereas if you and I live in communities that have vaccination rates that are very high and mask rates very high, we'll be fine.
The data that's quoted here is that on average throughout the U.S., about 2/3 of the population, 64%, have received at least one dose of a vaccine, but states vary. 77% for Vermont and Massachusetts, 46 to 49% for Idaho, Wyoming, West Virginia.
Yeah, well, you know full well that it also varies dramatically between Republicans and Democrats.
Right, correct. And between different countries in terms of what's called the vaccine.
There are countries where the vaccine rate is in 10%.
Right.
So how can people believe that? That it's nearly over? It's ridiculous.
Right. So you get to this place where you recognize that the available hosts for the virus to attach to are still a very large number of individuals throughout the world, right? Because you have a world of 10 billion and on average less than half have been vaccinated. That's 5 billion people that are all potential hosts. And so...
Well, I think that number is too high. I think the world population is about 6 billion.
I always think it's a much higher number for some reason.
Well, it could be because counting people in underdeveloped countries is virtually impossible.
Right. And so in many ways, you could say the virus has a lot of hosts that it can reach and that it can infect. And then the question becomes, what happens if that's what plays out? And then a variant plays out as well. And you have a repeat of what we just said, which can happen to even someone like Prince Charles, who's the next king. You often think the king is going to be most protected, or the heir apparent king, and his wife, I forget her name, the successor to Diana. I can't remember the names of all these people, but you think of them as royalty. And if royalty can get the virus,
Camilla.
Yeah, Camilla, right? Camilla Bowles, right. If the royalty can get the virus, and they presumably have the best doctors and the best precautions and the best security, then anyone can, particularly if it's true that he's gotten a second slug of it, right?
Well, I'm very suspicious that he has never been masked.
Right.
Or never masked entirely, but just when he felt like it. We have to do some reading about him. I forget most of it, but I know that there are a lot of negative things about him in respect to peculiar behavior.
Oh, okay. Well, he's got a brother that's in big trouble too. His younger brother, Andrew, is trying to dodge a federal criminal case against him in New York, and is losing, or seems to be losing, and I guess has now been defrocked by the mom, who obviously is making decisions like she doesn't expect to be on the throne much longer. But I don't.
Well, it's interesting because my first memory of the royal family occurred when I was, I think, about 7 years old or 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I was in elementary school in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day, our classrooms were big rooms, but they were all separated in a line on each floor by very high wooden folding doors.
Right.
So one day, the teacher said to all of us, "We're going to listen to a radio program that's very important."
Mm-hmm.
And so they folded back all of these folding doors to make a hall out of the 6 or 8 huge classrooms that were damn near a half a city block long.
Right.
All of us elementary school kids are sitting at our desks wondering what the hell this is all about.
Right.
They had a table in the center of this long room with a radio loudspeaker on it.
Right.
And we were there to listen to the king abdicating his throne in favor of his love of Wally Simpson.
Right. Yeah.
Who was that king? What's king what?
Yeah.
I don't remember what king. But none of us little kids knew what the hell that was all about. The teachers thought it was a big deal.
Really? Wow.
So here we're listening to this scratchy voice coming from London, which at that time, of course, the radio was not 1/10 as good as it is today.
Oh, you had the BBC being live broadcasted at the time?
It was a live broadcast of this king saying he doesn't want to be king anymore.
Yeah, for Wallace Simpson, for his wife.
Yeah, because of the woman I love, he said.
Yeah, I mean, that's weird because it's a little racy for an 8-year-old to be hearing that too, isn't it?
Well, it was really strange because none of us 8-year-olds knew what was going on.
It was the abdication of Edward VIII.
Yeah, whoever it was.
Edward VIII
who later became persona non grata.
Right.
with the royal family. And
Oh, that was the older brother to Queen Elizabeth's father. Right.
Yeah.
That's the chain of events because he abdicated. It fell upon Elizabeth's father to take the throne. And I guess he had a speech impediment. I mean, there's all sorts of other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Part of this movies, and more movies have been made about this stuff, it seems to me, than anything else in real life. But because of that abdication, Elizabeth fell in line for taking the throne from her father, right?
Yeah.
So this, I guess, is the story why Edward the Eighth abdicated the throne.
Yeah.
Mary,
and she had all these strikes against her. First of all, she was an American.
Right.
Secondly, she was a divorcee.
Right.
And the Brits were upset about that.
Right. Well, you could say that scandal indirectly repeated itself in a way with Diana and Camilla, right? There's like a scandal there.
I want to know why we even care.
Well, here's the date that you heard it, I think, December 11th, 1936. Does that sound right? That's what they're saying was the date of the radio announcement.
All right. So I was 8 years old. And
there you go. Right? Does that make sense?
Why would an 8-year-old care?
Well, they must have thought of it.
Know what the hell was going on?
They must have thought of it as history in the making and some sort of statement that love conquers all. That they wanted to impress on you.
We didn't know what love was. 8-year-old, no way.
So he declared his allegiance to his younger brother and soon to be King George VI, and he attempted to explain why he should abdicate. And I know there's been movies done about this, but this is interesting history that's now playing out in such an oddball way. But you could say to yourself, when you have these rules of what it means to be a king and who you can marry and all that jazz, it's pretty rigid. And so it does generate some controversy, including, for example, her grandson marrying Miss Markle, right?
Yep.
Right. That's another issue in a way. But the way we started down this thread is, of course, Charles supposedly has a second infection. And the reason I wanted to ask you about that is it just seems amazing to me because it really does suggest that even someone that's so wealthy and so protected and so royal and so famous can end up getting a second infection and presumably
I'm not sure about how accurate that is, because he, like many others in the royal family throughout the years, not only that family but many other royal families, are individuals who have different beliefs and personalities and constitutions and intelligence like any other group of people. And so although they may have available to them all of the health support that you described and more, it is unclear. In fact, it's almost a certainty that many of them don't take advantage of it, don't give a damn. And consequently, they suffer the consequences, just like any other rich family, even in this country. Look at all the rich, powerful people in this country who don't take the vaccine. Most of them are Republicans, I keep insisting, because the data is pretty clear.
I think your point might be someone who's rich, powerful, and famous may end up having this layer of hubris where they think there's no way that I'll get sick.
Yeah,
Like at some level, it becomes I'm bulletproof.
sure.
I can do whatever
Yeah.
because I have the wealth and I have the fame and I have the medical profession to back me up. But then it turns out that they take more risks and they end up getting a second infection if that's in fact what's really happening.
Well, how many senior politicians have we heard of in the past year who came down with positive COVID tests, even though the tests are weak? Just to say that they're positive is enough. And many of these politicians are wealthy, have access to all the health care they want,
Right.
but they ignore it.
Right. So maybe we're going to get some humility out of this.
I thought what you say is probably going to be true, but it's not, because we still have the 70% of Republicans who refuse to be vaccinated. And that's been true for more than a year.
Yeah, and perhaps your bigger point there is it's really not purely an individual decision, because you are affecting the lives of everyone else on the boat.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we're all on this boat that happens to be called planet Earth, or whatever state we're in, or whatever local community we're in, but it's like a boat. And when you don't take care of yourself, you generate a higher risk profile for everyone else that's on the boat. So in effect, your decisions have consequences for many others. And that's why in many ways you could call it selfish not to take the vaccine, even if you don't believe in it, because you just simply want to protect the boat.
Or wear a mask.
Or wear a mask, right? Like it seems like it can't be that you're going to infect the rest of the boat and end up sort of killing off a whole number of people who might well have been saved, but for the boat getting infected. Now you could extend that analogy of the boat to climate, to overconsumption, to pollution. You know, there's a lot of things that are affecting this boat. And a lot of
it's very much, it's not very much, but it is illustrated in the opposite way by how even in the past century or so, we treated lepers. Lepers were removed from society and isolated on an island or in a forest town somewhere well distant from the general population, because people were so fearful of leprosy and knew that it was spread by person-to-person contact, that they isolated these people, broke up families, and destroyed all kinds of activities, and most importantly, families, by doing that. And it was legal. It was encouraged. But today, the opposite is going on. The lepers are in our midst constantly.
Far worse than lepers, you could say, right? Because those that are going to transmit the virus are.
Well, that's why I said they are worse than lepers.
Right.
So we have this opposing phenomena of diseases where people are isolated totally, and other situations where, like today, many people don't give a damn. It also reminds me of quarantining. That was an accepted procedure when a boat came to this country and many other countries with knowledge of sickness aboard, or even in cases when there was no knowledge of sickness aboard, but simply because the boat came from a certain country.
Right.
And they said, you're bloody well going to sit in that harbor for 3 weeks until there's no disease detected, and then you're allowed to come off.
Right.
So that concept seems to be so highly variable in respect to when it's practiced and when it isn't practiced. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Len, thank you for giving me your time this afternoon. Now you take care, okay?
I'm trying to. During that week, I have an appointment with my cardiologist, my GP, and my dentist.
Wow, you're going to get fixed up. You have your annual review.
My annual physical.
Yeah, you're doing the whole 9 yards. Well, that's good.
Okay.
I'm glad you're organized. I'm glad you're organizing your stuff for that week.
Thanks, Jack.
All right.
Who are you
care.
rooting for? Who are you rooting for the game?
I guess because I went to UCLA, I need to root for the LA Rams, but I haven't really followed this year's teams at all. I really haven't followed them at all. I mean, I
have. I've followed the Niners.
Yeah, interesting. It was an interesting season. Of course, they didn't get the kinds of attendance that they would have otherwise wanted, but
they don't need it. All they need is a television contract.
They got it. Yeah, the TV just saves them, and the ads, of course, are what everyone really watches.
Yeah, of course.
It'll be interesting to see what happens there. Anyway, take care.
Okay, you too. Regards.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.